Hi all, my name is Vijay and I'll be taking this session of the webinar series by IIM Rohtak. Before starting, I'd like to introduce you all to myself. I have done my bachelor's in economics and then I was pursuing my master's from Presidency University in Applied Economics for 1 year before joining IIM Rohtak for my MBA. Before starting the session, let me take you through the rules and regulations to be followed during the session. A couple of instructions for the webinar. Number one, we are streaming on Hangouts on air and there will be some lag, but that should not be a problem because a recorded video will be uploaded to YouTube shortly. Number two, there will be a Q&A session in the end. This session will not allow two-way dialogue, so type the questions in the Q&A panel. Write the questions on the Q&A panel on the left, on the right, on the Q&A panel on the right, and they will be answered in the end. No questions will be answered while the session is going on. So with this, we start our session on economics. So the session agenda is that to make you participants know the basics of economics. So under economics, there are two main foundations. One is microeconomics and the other one is macroeconomics. Micro deals with consumers, producers and markets, and the macroeconomics part deals with an aggregate level workings of the same. Economics also deals in international trade, a nation's history, and applied branches like econometrics, game theory, and much more. However, we'll limit ourselves to rudimentary theories of micro and macroeconomics. But before we start, we need to go through some basic theories which are accurately named as the ABCs of economics. The first one is the demand. The demand curve is the relation between the quantity of a good the consumers are willing to buy and the price of the good. It can be expressed mathematically as quantity demanded, that is QD, which is a function of price given a parameter that is personal income. The first concept that I'd like to share with you is the difference between movement along a curve and shift of a curve. First, we'll deal with movement along the demand curve. Change in a variable value changes the dependent variable. Here, if you look at the adjacent graph, you can see that as price decreases, price which is the dependent variable, we'll find that the quantity demanded decreases because price and quantity demanded are negatively related. Now, taking care of shift in demand, as the parameter value of a function changes, the entire curve shifts either to the left or to the right. Here we know that our income will actually help us consume more. So as income increases, our quantity demanded will also increase. So with the increase in income, there is a rightward shift in the quantity demanded, which means that for every price level, now that I have more income, I can consume or demand more. The same applying to the supply curve, which is defined as the relation between the quantity of goods that the producers are willing to sell and the price of the good. Mathematically, quantity supplied is a function of price given the parameter, the price of the factors of production. So movement along the supply curve would be like if price increases, the producers have a greater incentive to produce more, so they would want to supply more quantity, so QS also increases. And a shift in the supply curve would be that if the price of the factors of production decrease, it would cost less for the producers to supply a given quantity, so the quantity supplied for any given price level of the good increases. I would like to repeat that the P bracket F is the price of the factors of production, not the good that is being sold in the market. Now, equilibrium. Equilibrium or a steady state is the point of stability where there is convergence as price changes. So, Quantity demanded and quantity supplied will equate in the equilibrium as Q star, and we will find a corresponding price level that is denoted as P star. So Q star and P star together will form the equilibrium in the market. Now there can be shifts in the equilibrium due to shift in demand curve, supply curve, or both. The case where both shift and we find a new equilibrium in the market is shown in the figure on the right. Now there may be shortages or surpluses in the market where it means that the market has failed to function properly due to either inherent problem in the market or due to intervention. Cases that are available in the economy are cartels, government policies such as quota, price flooring and price ceiling, which will be covered later, etc. In these cases, what happens is, in case of a surplus, the quantity demanded is less than the quantity produced because the price at which the market functions is above the equilibrium price, so the sellers want to sell more than the quantity demanded. And in case of a shortage, it is just the reverse, where the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. Into microeconomics, we start with consumer behavior. As I told you before, that microeconomics is dealing with consumers, producers, and markets. So we'll first start with consumers. So consumer behavior deals with the utility, budget, and demand concepts. So starting with the concept of utility. Does eating pizza satisfy you? If yes, then you derive a positive utility from the consumption of a unit of pizza. But what is utility? It is defined as the satisfaction derived from the act of consumption. So starting with the concept of total utility, which is defined as how satisfied you are after consuming, say, n number of pizzas. And marginal utility would be how much extra satisfaction did the last unit of pizza give you. But the problem that might arise is that how would you measure it? So that is where we take the help of utility functions, which are, there are standard utility functions available in the textbooks of microeconomics, which people use while describing the consumer behavior. Now, there is one more concept, that is diminishing utility, which means that after consuming the first unit, when we move on to the second unit gives us less satisfaction than the preceding one. And the fourth and the last point that you need to remember is that the equal marginal principle, which means that keep on consuming a product that unit. Will explain this in the later slides. Now we move on to the concept of indifference curves. The curve is defined as all combinations of market baskets that provide a consumer with the same utility level or the level of satisfaction. Basically, here what we mean is that suppose the economy has only two goods, one is clothing and the other one is food. There, on the clothing and food plane, there are various combinations which mean that every basket has a different quantity of clothing and a different quantity of food. For example, let us explain point B on the graph. It says that point B has 50 clothing units and only 10 food units per week, whereas point D has 20 clothing units and 40 food units per week. So if we assume that our point of reference is point A, where we consume 30 clothing units and 20 food units, and we map all other baskets which give us the same level of utility, probably defined through a utility function that we have assumed, then we'll find that the indifference curve that we get, which is the locus of all the equally satisfying baskets of goods, passes through the market basket A and B as well as D. All these units, if you notice, will have the same level of utility. A consumer will be indifferent between choosing these three basket of goods, that is A, B and D. But he will prefer basket E, which has more of which is above the utility line, which means that plotting that point on a utility indifference curve will give us higher utility. Each indifference curve signifies a particular utility level that can be achieved by consuming any one of the baskets on that curve. G, however, lies below the indifference curve, which means that a consumer will not prefer to consume that basket if he has the option of choosing A, B, or D, or any other points on that indifference curve U1. Now, given a budget, which is a blue line, which gives us the equation, that is, if you have a income, say M, and you know the price of the two goods, that is clothing and food, you will have to limit yourself to that income while choosing a particular consumption bundle and then maximize your utility. So let us start with a story to explain how utility maximization works. Suppose you're in the middle of a desert and you've been walking for days and you don't know when you fainted, but when you woke up, you find yourself in a village and there is a village head waiting in front of you with a glass of water. So every time you want a glass of water, you have to pay some money. For the first one, you don't have any choice, and he charges an exorbitant amount, that is 500. But after that, you start to bargain as you know that the next one will not have as much satisfaction as the first. The trick is to know how many glasses you will consume. So if you look at the table that is attached, we'll find that for the first glass, the total cost is that 500. For two glasses, you are willing to pay 850. For three glasses, 1100. Four glasses, 1280, and likewise. But the marginal cost, that is the cost you incur for each additional glass, reduces as you keep on consuming more. And the marginal utility also reduces, as we have talked about the diminishing marginal utility. But how many glasses should you have? That is derived from the equation marginal benefit equal to marginal cost. Here by benefit we mean the marginal utility. So we'll stop at glass 4 because we see that at glass 4 the marginal cost, that is the price I pay additionally, is 180, and so is the marginal utility. But beyond that, the price is above the utility that I receive. So what does the consumer want? He wants maximum satisfaction for the money spent. And as I told, given a utility function, which is u, x, y, and the budget, we have to limit ourselves within the expenditure, that is P1 into x plus P2 into y. And utility is maximized at the point where there is a point of tangency in the blue line and the red line, that is denoted by the star, which is just beside H. At this point, we'll find that the marginal returns to marginal rate of substitution, that is a mathematical function which shows that how much you would like to let go of x, let go of y to gain x. This has to be equal to the price ratio, that is the price of x divided by the price of y. Now diminishing marginal utility and diminishing marginal rate of substitution are the assumptions for maximization. Using these, you'll be able to find that in the given case, the desert story, the maximization occurs at glass 4. Now the mathematical explanations have been intentionally left out so as to not confuse you, but if you want to go at it, then you need to derive the partial derivatives of the utility function as well as the budget function, where m is equal to e. Now that wraps up the utility maximization part. The next part is finding out different forms of goods, that is perfect complements, perfect substitutes. What are the marginal rates of substitutions for these cases? The first one, as you'll be able to see, is that MRS is equal to 0 or infinity and we get L-shaped curves. And the second one, MRS is constant and we get slanted straight lines. Now, how do we get the demand curve from utility maximization? Because we know that the consumers together form the demand curve. So we get demand curve from the consumer utility maximization given the prices P1 and P2, and the demand will be equal to X star and Y star for goods X and Y, because we have an income of M, and as prices change, going through the same practice of utility maximization, we'll be able to find new levels of demand for X and Y separately. Moving on, we find ourselves dealing with production theory, where we have production, cost, and supply. Now, producers have a very simple objective and which can be mathematically dealt with very easily. They want to increase their profits, which is revenue minus cost, by utilizing different input combinations. Input combinations are here assumed to be only two, which is capital and labor. There may be many more like land, technology, etc., but we will not be dealing with them for mathematical simplicity. Now, the revenue demand depends on the market demand given the price. The producer cannot influence the market demand because it is derived from how the consumers see the price and their consumptions. But the cost is dependent on the producer's choice given factor prices. So given a technology which is defined as a production function, suppose Q equal to F function of labor and capital, and factor prices for labor and capital are given as PL and PK, the producer decides. Now he will have to plot a locus of all combinations of input, such that is labor and capital, which give him the equal amount of quantity produced. Here we will see on the right side, the first figure on the top is the isoquant, the concept that I'm talking about right now. Using combination Ka and La, Kb and Lb, and Kc and Lc, we get the quantity level Q naught. That is, if we put Ka and La in the function Flk, we'll get the quantity Q naught. Now moving on, the next concept is cost lines. The iso cost line is the line where using the different combinations of labor and capital give us the same cost, because we are playing with the price of labor into labor plus price of capital into capital factors. If we decrease labor and increase capital by staying on the same line, we'll find the same cost. Here the production level is fixed because the producer has an estimation of the demand that he expects the market to have, and he wants to satisfy that, and he has to minimize the cost to maximize his profits. So the optimal choice is the point of tangency, which is shown as point A in the figure on the bottom left side, where the marginal rate of technical substitution, an economics concept, is equal to the price ratio of labor and capital. Marginal rate of technical substitution is the ratio of marginal product of labor to the marginal product of capital. If you want to find that out, you need to differentiate partially the production function with respect to labor and capital, and then find the ratio. The marginal product and the marginal cost have to be equal so that we get the optimal amount of labor and capital required to produce the quantity required in the market. Now, the supply is the quantity that can be produced using the cost minimizing input combination given the cost level and the factor prices. We have the factor prices PL and PK. We know the cost level has to be minimized, suppose at C0, and we have to produce quantity level Q naught. So putting all these in the maximization or optimization function, we'll find that the point A is the labor and capital combination that is required to achieve all this. So consumers maximize utility given income. Utility is a function and income is the given given in rupees or any currency, and producers minimize cost that is given in currency such that they fulfill the criteria of a certain units of quantity. Now markets. Markets are of two types. One is perfect competition and the other one is imperfect competition. In perfect competition, the prices are given and the producers only decide on the amount of quantity they want to produce and supply in the market. Whereas in monopoly, nothing is given. You only can estimate the demand that is in the market, and you have to choose both the price and the quantity through maximization of profits. Non-competitive or imperfect competition has monopoly, duopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. Now, monopoly is a market where there is only one seller and he has supreme power. In duopoly, there are two sellers fighting each other for market share, and there are different decisions to be taken in a duopoly, such as first mover or simultaneous moving, and what would be the payouts and something like that. It's it falls under the purview of game theory, which is not within the scope of discussion. So next, moving on, we have oligopoly where there are more than two players in the market who are selling to the consumers, and the concepts that in are under this are cartels, which are formed by many players, limited number of players though, such as the OPEC, which has total control over the oil market, but there are instabilities within the cartel, and every player wants to maximize their own by either cheating or cutting the market share of the other players. And the final one is monopolistic competition, which is the reflection of the real life scenario where there are multiple sellers and multiple buyers, but decide the price, and but market equilibrium cannot be decided by them because consumers also have a role to play. Suppose we have a product group, soaps. Now there are different types of soaps available in the market and each charge a different price. Consumers can differentiate within these products and they choose which one to buy and which one not to buy. So each particular soap brand will have a different demand curve and a different price sensitivity. Now, monopoly are reverse of all these forms of markets where they are defined by the number of buyers. Monopsony is only one buyer. Oligopsony is more than one or multiple buyers. This can be useful while dealing with factor markets where the buyer or the firm decides how much of labor and capital to hire. Now, after this, we have government interventions which actually lead to stabilizing market failure. Number one is tax, where there is either a shift in the supply or in the demand, which leads to higher price but less quantity. If you see the graph that is visible, although it is very small, the green part and the red part are contributing to the price increase, and the red part are contributing to the sellers respectively. Now, quota is limiting the number of the amount of consumption allowed in the market, either by by the suppliers or by the consumers. So the pink line in the second graph is the quota line. Beyond this, there will be no goods available in the market, and it has its own implications. A price ceiling is the maximum price that the government allows you to charge. This is like the we can say that this is generally if it falls below the equilibrium, it will create a excess demand condition where the price being lower than the equilibrium, there will be greater demand than supply. Conversely, price flooring is the minimum price that you have to set if you want to function in the market, and this leads to prices higher than the equilibrium and excess supply conditions. All these conditions are required keeping in mind socialist views, but they lead to market failure. That is, equilibrium cannot be attained in these conditions. Now, this miscellaneous section that I'll be talking about is only for students of with an economics background and can and students who are just here to learn the basics of economics do not need to bother themselves with these concepts. Phase law supply, which says that own demand. This was functional in 1940, in the early 1940s, 60 to 1970s, when there were very few producers for a particular good, and whatever they produced was consumed by the market. The next point is normal goods. Normal goods are, as clearly understood, probably understood, are behave normally with changes in price. That is, they hold the law of demand holds in case of normal goods. When price increases, their consumption decreases, and when price decreases, their consumption increases. Inferior goods are those which, if income increases, their consumption decreases because the added income is given to normal goods for more consumption. Complementary goods are those which complement each other. Suppose a car and the four tires. So they always come in 1:4 ratio, that is one car and four tires, or one bike and two tires. Substitutes would be goods that are rivaling against each other, such as coffee and tea. They cater to the same market, but people switch between both of them. Giffen goods are goods which do not hold the law of demand. That is, if price increases, their consumption increases, or if price decreases, their consumption decreases. This is only meant for theoretical explanation. These goods have not existed in the economy. Now, the next is the elasticity concept of price, income, and cross elasticity. That is, how much consumption or quantity demanded or supplied is increased with change in one unit of price or income or price of any other good. The next concept that you need to take care of is the bandwagon effect and the snob effect. Bandwagon effect says that if I am consuming a product that is very stylish, there is a high probability that people around me will start wanting that product as well. This leads to greater increase in the aggregate demand, and snob effect is what a snob shows, that is to differentiate himself from society. If I am buying a Samsung mobile and everyone is buying a Samsung mobile, a snob will decide not to buy a Samsung mobile and buy some other mobile because he wants to differentiate himself from the rest. So this will lead to decrease in aggregate demand. The last point is the Cobb-Douglas functions of utility and production. This point I've specifically intentionally added because I was asked this question, I could not answer it. What do alpha and beta mean? The alpha and beta are the output elasticity measures of responsiveness to output to a change in levels of either labor or capital. Suppose alpha is 0.45, that means that since alpha is to the power of labor, if there is 1% increase in usage of labor, there is a type error. If there is 1% increase in the usage of labor, usage would lead to approximately 0.45% increase in output. If you have any doubts, you could refer to Rubenfeld Pindick Mehta, which is a very nice book. And this wraps up microeconomics. We move on to macroeconomics. Now, macroeconomics, the first concept that I'd like to introduce is the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Now, aggregate demand is the summation of all the demand that a consumer makes for a particular final good or service that is available in the economy. So, aggregate demand is the total demand for final goods and services in the economy at a given time and price level. It specifies amounts of goods and services that will be purchased at all possible price levels. It is made up of four basic components. Consumption demand, investment demand, government exports. Net is, if you can think of anything else, I don't think anything else, any other factor will be, any other factor that you can think of can be categorized in these four, under these four headings. Now, aggregate supply is the total supply of goods and services that firms plan to sell during a specific time period. They are a function of price level present in the economy, that is, whatever price level is for a particular good in the economy. Now, coming to government policies, in case there is a government present in the economy and it decides to intervene in the market functioning, there are two types of policies. Number one is the fiscal policy. An increase or decrease in government expenditure has a direct impact on the aggregate demand and leads to increase or decrease of demand of goods and services in the economy. So, the government can influence the aggregate demand of the economy through changes such as increase in government expenditure, that is G, or decrease in taxes, which will increase the disposable income and the consumption of the people, that is C. So by doing that, what happens is an increase in government expenditure will shift the AD curve to the right, and this will cause increase in real GDP, but also increase in real price level, which will, and if we see P2 minus P1 will be the inflation that is there in the economy, and Y2 minus Y1 will be the growth. And the same can happen. Decrease in taxes is equivalent to the increase in government expenditure, but increase in taxes will lead to recession or negative growth. Monetary policy, the next tool that is available to the government to intervene in the market. Monetary policy is a process by which the monetary authority, it may be the government or an agency of the government, which is the RBI in case of India. So the monetary authority controls the money supply to target interest rate and promote economic growth and stability, because interest rate determines the level of investment in the economy, as well as interest rate is directly related to the inflation level of the economy. Now, the central bank of the economy influences interest rate by increasing or decreasing the monetary base. So the government has only one tool in hand to change the price level of the economy, that is the money supply. And by changing the money supply, it will affect the interest rates as well as the inflation of the economy. Now, money supply can be changed through, money is created through banks in a very complex process of lending and deposits and lending. Now, by expanding or contracting the monetary base, the government achieves its target rate of growth through investment or inflation stabilization. The primary way of doing that is either by open market operations or reserve requirements. We'll cover both of these in the next slide. Now, open market operations are activities where the central bank sells or buys government bonds. These bonds are bought by banks in exchange for money, which helps control the money supply in the economy. Reserve requirements are, scheduled banks are required to hold a fraction of deposits they receive with the central bank. Now, these required reserves also form a ratio, two ratios. One ratio is known as the statutory liquidity ratio (SLR), which specifies the fraction of deposits that the bank needs to hold with themselves in order to maintain a certain minimum level of liquidity. And cash reserve ratio is a specified minimum fraction of total deposits which banks need to hold in either in cash or in deposits with the central bank. Now, both of these are fixed by the RBI, and these help the RBI to maintain the money supply in the economy. This can be explained as, if the statutory liquidity ratio or the cash reserve ratio is increased, banks will have to keep more money with themselves or the RBI, and they cannot lend this money to the public in the market. And this will cut the money creation cycle in the very beginning, and the economy will be left with limited amount of money supply. Now, the theoretical background behind this is given by the equation mv equal to py, where m is the money supply, p is the price, y is the grow income of the economy, the national GDP of the economy, and v is the velocity of money, which is assumed to be fixed and need not be bothered about. Now, if for a given economy, if the GDP is fixed, we'll find that with change in money supply, the price levels are directly changing in a proportional way. So if money supply increases, there will be inflation. If money supply decreases, there will be deflation. Now, how does the central bank authority control the money supply in the economy? Through both these options, specifically the reserve requirements. The tool that it uses is the repo rate. The repo rate or the repurchase rate is the interest rate charged by RBI for banks when they approach RBI for short-term loans. Now, short-term loans are required by banks because they need to maintain a certain level of liquidity in the bank while they are engaging in the banking functions of lending and borrowing, etc. Now, the repo rate is the only rate which relates every other interest rate in the economy, and using the repo rate, the RBI can directly control the money supply. The reverse repo rate is when banks park money in the RBI and earn interest on that. The reverse repo is defined as repo less 1% by the RBI. And there is also the marginal standing facility, which is used for overnight liquidity crunch, which is 1% above the repo rate. So using the marginal standing facility, the repo rate and the reverse repo rate, the RBI controls the entire money supply of the economy. Now, using this figure or this demo, this figure, I'll try to explain the different rates that are present in the economy. The first is the bank rate, which is used by scheduled banks for long-term loans from the RBI. The marginal standing facility, as explained, is only used by scheduled commercial banks to borrow from the RBI for overnight liquidity shortages. The repo rate is for the short-term loans of 15 days to 1 month from the RBI, and this interest rate is, as mentioned previously, 1% below the MSF. The reverse repo rate is 1% below the repo rate, and it is used when RBI pays its clients for short-term loans. The SLR and CRR have been fixed at 22 and 4% for a long time, and they are the required reserve ratios. But these are not the current statistics, and the statistics have changed. For the latest repo rate, reverse repo rate, or MSF, please visit the links mentioned in the slide. Now we move on to the balance of payments, which introduces us to the part of net exports. Balance of payments are accounting records for all monetary transactions between countries. So imports and exports will directly affect balance of payment. The balance of payment accounts summarize international transactions for a period that is generally a year, where in domestic currency, where all components of the balance of payments are dealt with, either there is outflow of money or inflow of money, and the overall effect always has to be zero. The rule is the balance of payment always balances. Now there are two parts of the balance of payment. One is the current account and the other part is the capital account. Using the capital account, we balance the deficit or surplus in the current account so that the BOP is equal to zero at the end of the year. Now the current account has two parts. One is the trade account and the other part is factor income and transfers. The trade account is basically the earnings from exports minus the earnings from imports. Now the next part is factor earnings, where there is income from abroad minus income to abroad. So suppose you are you're an Indian national working in USA and earning money. So whatever money you earn will be a part of the factor income from abroad. And if there is someone here earning money in USA and earning money in India, then the factor income from India will be a part of the factor income from India. So this is the balance of payments. Now, in India working in an NGO and is a US citizen, whatever part of BOP identity assumes that any surplus or deficit in the current account will be balanced by the capital account. So if there is a surplus in the current account, there will be a deficit in the capital account, and if and vice versa. That means that in case of a current account surplus, whatever amount of surplus is there will be used to reinvest in foreign assets such that the BOP is equal to zero equation holds. So, in case of current account surplus and deficit, capital account inflow and outflow will maintain the balance. Now, using exchange rates, we can understand the relation between the currencies of two nations. Suppose the going rate of exchange rate for the Indian rupees is $62, around about $62. So it means that for every dollar, US dollar is worth 62 Indian rupees. Now, depreciation of a country's currency refers to decrease in the value of that country's currency. Suppose the rupee value falls from 50 per dollar to 60 per dollar. It means that the value of dollar is increasing in terms of rupees. In the beginning, you had to pay only 50 rupees to buy $1, but in the end, you have to pay 60 rupees for $1. So the dollar is becoming costlier, and appreciation is the just the opposite. Now, in case of exchange rate quotations, you need to take care of the direct quote and the indirect quote. The direct quote is when the country uses its own currency as the base currency and the foreign currency as counter, that is INR 62 per dollar, and the reverse is indirect quote, which is not used by India, but Great Britain uses this system. Now, effects of currency appreciation. In case the currency appreciates, that is, if the dollar was worth 50 rupees, now it now the value of dollar decreases to 40 rupees. So what happens is that exports become more expensive, foreign prices will increase, and foreign consumers will find our products more expensive, and exports will decrease. Imports, 1 rupee now buys exports will decrease, and this will cause a decrease in the aggregate demand and a fall in the price level, which will mean that the entire economic equilibrium will shift towards left and downwards. Now, effects of currency depreciation are just the opposite, where the imports become cheaper and the exports become more expensive. And sorry, the imports become more expensive, and exports become competitively cheaper, and net export increases, which leads to higher levels of overall income as well as higher price level. That is, there is real GDP growth and inflation accompanies this. But we must keep in mind that this will follow the path which resembles the J, that is why it is named as a J curve. Devaluation or depreciation leads to follows a path where the forex reserve of the nation first depletes, then it starts to increase as the effects of increased prices of exports and decreased prices of imports kicks in. Now, a word of caution that must be spelled out clearly is that devaluation is a government imposed rule, whereas depreciation is a market outcome. And by market, we mean the balance of payments and exchange rate market. Now, coming to the types of deficits, there are 5 types of deficit that we'll be covering. The first is the primary deficit, which is derived from deducting interest payment components from the total deficit of any budget. Now, the next part is the current account deficit, which simply means that the country is importing more than it is exporting, and it cannot sustain doing that. In the form of goods or investments from foreign countries. Now, current account deficit is only good if it is being utilized in investment projects to which have a higher rate of return than the debt interest rate that they have to pay. Capital account deficits are simply a capital account money is flowing out of the country, and it means that the nation is buying more foreign assets than it previously did, and it is not selling its own as it previously increase and are more than the revenue it generates. That is basically that the government is spending more than it is earning through taxes. Trade deficit is the case where the imports are greater than exports. The trade deficit is directly related with the current account deficit because current account comprises majorly of the trade account, and factor incomes form a very small portion of the current account. Now, again, coming to the miscellaneous part of macroeconomics, what students of macroeconomics need to know specifically and can expect questions from are John Maynard Keynes, or the father of economics, versus classical theory. What are the major bones of contention between these two theory school of thoughts? The classical dichotomy, that is the difference between real and nominal. Real, that is the growth, and nominal, that is inflation. Are these two even related, or does price level affect output level of an economy? Marginal propensity to consume, or the tendency of an individual to consume. How much would an individual consume? What fraction of a money would the individual want to consume if he gains an increase of 1 unit in his income? That is, if you have one more rupee in your income, how much of that rupee would you want to spend on consuming goods? There are different economic theories such as the ISLM, that is investment savings and liquidity money concept, the consumption models of Keynes, Modigliani, and Friedman. If you have any doubts, you can refer to Gregory Mankiw, and it will easily explain the macroeconomic concepts. That will be all from me. Now we'll take care of the question answers after a 2-minute break. So I'll be taking the Q&A session for 10 minutes, and after answering as many questions that I'm able to, the rest of the questions will be taken care of by the other PR members in the Facebook page. Now, the first question that I'll be addressing is, what is rupee depreciation? rupee depreciation is that in 1950s, 1 rupee was worth $1, but now it has turned out that 1 rupee is only worth $1 is equal to 62 rupees. That means that whatever we could buy from the dollar value has increased. So if I'm buying a chocolate which used to cost me $1, I would only have to pay 1 rupee in 1950, but now I would have to pay 62 rupees for the same chocolate. That means that if the rupee depreciates for import goods, I need to spend more. Now, why it has been rupee depreciating? The dollar index has reached a 3-year high because the US economy has been recovering from the global economic recession or the US subprime crisis very steadily, and the entire world knows that US has been putting a lot of effort to make its economy stand on its feet again. So as the US economy recovers, more and more investments will be flowing towards the US economy, in uh, which could have come to the Indian economy had the US economy not recovered. So what is happening is that the rupee is feeling the punch of recovery of recession, and the credit rating agencies worldwide have been rating India very poorly. So people are not willing to invest in India. So as an effect, the rupee is depreciating against the dollar. The value of rupee itself has remained the same; it has not changed. But with respect to the dollar, it has decreased, which means that if I invest in India, the rupee value that I get from that investment will be not as much as the dollar value that I get from an investment in US. Now, the next question that I'll be taking care of is Obama's visit to India. What would be the effect? Now, Obama's visit to India has been his second visit, and it was as the chief guest of the 65th Republic year or Republic anniversary celebration of India. What they have done is Obama has pledged a lot of money for India, for investment in India, which may or may not actualize. Only time will tell. But it means that the economy has the relations between US and India have solidified. Now there have been many bilateral investment treaties under discussion. The content of discussion is not privy to the public, so we can't comment on that. But the two publicly claimed agreements that have been formed are both on environment issues. So this is basically saying that US has an interest in India's improvement. Now the next part is excise duty rise on petrol or diesel and the impact on fiscal deficit. Now fiscal deficit is the difference between the government expenditure and the revenue that the government earns through taxes such as the excise duty. So if the excise duty is increasing on petrol or diesel, which is an inelastic good, that is, price changes do not affect its consumption. So then there will be rise in the tax, and it will the tax will increase the revenue of the government. So there will be the raise will be as much as 17,000 crores, and India, given the fact that the Indian fiscal deficit is in a very poor state, this will probably help India recover its fiscal deficit by a great extent. And the hope is to what we can hope is that this rise in revenue will be invested in infrastructure building, which may give better returns in the future.